Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Nike KD17, and honestly, there's a lot to like about these. There obviously are a few cons to them, and some pretty unique tech under the hood too that I was not expecting. So, let's get into it. Now, starting off in the uppers, honestly, the tongue and everything adjacent to it on its own, I'm actually a pretty big fan of. The actual length and width of the shoe, which we'll get to in the fit section, is what kind of throws some things off there. But just the design itself, I actually really do like. Now, I know this is a throwback, or a nod to old school Nike shoes, but when you've got the lace line reinforced here with these little wings that go down into here, into the strobel board where the uppers meet the strobel, honestly, this is a great way to get a lot of foxing and reinforcement on the shoe without having to put these really big stabilizing elements on it and jack the weight of the shoe up. And the way that this is all connected to the medial and lateral side through the laces, right, is really a nice design choice. It really does make the shoe quite a bit more stable and act as more of one unit, which is nice. Now, the tongue itself, super padded, felt really comfortable, and finally Nike did not make the little emblem here on the tongue something super hard and uncomfortable. It's just a little air bubble there, so there's no discomfort there whatsoever, but the padding in the tongue is absolutely fantastic. Now, the uppers themselves are pretty much just a woven mesh upper, so there's really nothing super special about it. You look at it on the breathability test, only heated up 97.9 degrees, pretty consistent with most other Nike shoes we've seen recently that just do not want to heat up. However, if you look at the breathability mapping on this, that tells a little bit more of the tale, and that fog was not getting out of anywhere except for really on both sides of the tongue, right where that gusset ends in the ankle collar. I mean, that's really the only place that fog was getting out. And it was getting out quite a bit there, but that's just a product of how the tongue meets the uppers. So although these aren't going to hold on to a lot of heat, they are probably going to hold on to a little bit of moisture. That's just something you're going to sacrifice for all this super nice bunting and padding, which does make the uppers feel a little bit more bear hug-like. It just makes them a lot more plush and comfortable though. And speaking of that, if you swoop around the ankle collar to the back here to the heel counter, once again, that ridiculously thick, Nike KD heel counter. We've seen this on a few KD shoes where it gets really thick back there in the heel counter. That's nice because some of KD's shoes can be a little bit flexible, so they do need a little bit more reinforcement in the heel counter. This one's no different. It's a pretty flexible shoe, so I'm glad that they put this in there. However, in the 17s, the heel slippage is less than the 16s, which was less than the 15s. So really on this one, heel slippage was mild to moderate when I first got them on. Once I was able to break in these wings here of the shoe, because this is what really takes a long time to break in. Once these got broken in, then the heel slippage really went down. I will say though, just in terms of the feelings of support, if they would have just put one more lace eyelet in this, you really would have been able to suck that ankle collar down without really having to crank down these wings. That does give a little bit of irritation to anybody with a bulkier lateral foot, right? A little more high volume on the outside of their foot. We'll get to that in the fit section, but that'd be the only thing up there that I really saw could have really kind of fixed a lot of those fit issues. A lot of that comes down to the dimensions of the shoe too, like I said, we'll talk about, but other than that, honestly, pretty good. Now, if you look at this on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, yeah, the burr makes it through the wax drag guard here, but it does not make it through the woven mesh, which is nice. You also have some actual, like the TPU guarding here, and then some foam here actually integrated into the uppers. So I would say on outdoor courts, because you do have exposed foam, these probably are gonna start to look pretty weird in terms of dragging or sliding, but in terms of the drag guard on these, they're honestly a little bit more durable than I thought they would be. And I wasn't sure where to make mention of this little TPU piece here on the lateral side, but I'll just do it kind of in between the uppers and the midsole. This is nice because, number one, you do get a little bit more lateral stability, which is great on the shoe, but it doesn't have to be really big or bulky. Remember in the 16s, it had that big piece on the lateral side, which was pretty cool, but because there's all this other reinforcing here, you can kind of make this a little bit more low profile on the lateral side of the shoe. The shoe still has enough lateral stability in and of itself, but just adding this little bar here gives just, almost like a double cover on the lateral side of plastic. So actually, I think this is honestly one of the better design elements in the uppers and kind of midsole of the shoe, because it just shows you that, what you're getting with the lace line reinforcement here in the containing elements, this just kind of is like a little cherry on top, which I really liked. But getting into the midsole teardown, I was expecting just air strobel and then zoom air unit in the forefoot. However, got something a little bit different here. This is Nike shank strobel in the forefoot. Now, obviously in the rear foot, you've got the air strobel unit, and then this does appear to be cushioned on the bottom. I did do a comparison with Nike Phylon under the microscope. This is definitely a little bit more open pored than the traditional Phylon on the microscope. So I'm going with Cushlon on this. It could be Cushlon, 2.0, 3.0. It is a little bit more dense and firm than some other Cushlons I've seen in the past. So, really Cushlon is a product of Phylon as it is, but it's on the microscope, a little bit more porous than a traditional Phylon. But when you get into the forefoot, you got this bottom-loaded, pretty chunky Zoom Air unit in the forefoot, but then you have a piece of plastic here on top. And it was weird because when I had them on foot, and I hadn't cut the shoe open yet, I really wasn't aware of exactly what was underneath of these things. I was saying to myself, for a flexible shoe, it does feel a little bit hard and board-like when I come down, and then you get this, you kind of see why. It is pretty chunky when I put my knife through it, so I mean, it's definitely, it's definitely doing something in the forefoot. The one thing I wish that Nike would have done was just extend it into the midfoot a little bit, because although if you look at the bounce height test on this thing, yeah, 27.5 centimeters in the rear foot and then 41 in the forefoot, and the thud that ball bearing made in the forefoot is crazy, just because it's bouncing off of that big Zoom Air unit and then plastic on top of it, so it does have a nice, springboard. The thing is though, is when the shoe is activated, right, that shank only goes to the midfoot. So the shoe can still really, it kind of collapse there in the midfoot. So if they would have done like the Curry line does, where they just extended into the midfoot a little bit more, right, crossing one more zone there into the midfoot, then that's where you could have gotten a little bit more of a diving board effect on this. So I like the idea. We'll talk about the fit and playability of these, what this kind of does to certain people, and the feelings it can kind of give you in your body, but I do think it was pretty cool that they were able to get a pretty chunky piece of plastic there in the forefoot as the strobo board. And getting into the outsole tread, it is a pretty wavy topographical map type pattern. Honestly, it's the gapping in it. It's pretty wide in the rear foot, and then in the forefoot actually, getting closer into kind of the distal midfoot, almost the forefoot, really wide gap between those linear pieces of tread. So honestly, this thing was gripping pretty hard on hardwood as well as outdoor courts. On hardwood, I noticed, makes a really loud screech when you're on them. I mean, just because of that gapping. The grip though was really, really consistent. We've seen this with New Balance doing that too, where they're making a little bit of a wider tread pattern. It just seems like it interacts with the court a little bit better that way, and I think it's kind of what Nike is seeing too. So honestly, this was really consistent on indoor courts, on outdoor courts, initial grip versus going through that little, graining period versus warming and, versus, having these a little bit down the road. So honestly, this was some of the better grip I've seen from Nike basketball since the LeBron 21 came out. Look at it there on that viewing box, that tread is really working pretty hard to create grip. Look at it on the grip test ramp, I guess I should say. They did have initial grip of 41 degrees. So like I said, these things are not slouches when it comes to grip. Now, if you look at the speed ratio on these things, speaking of that grip, these things come in at a 2.40, then a shank score of 0.2. It is a shank and it is top loaded, although it's not doing as, if you're on your forefoot, yeah, I mean, it's doing more, right? But that brings it up to a 2.60, and I think that's kind of where these things are. They did not feel super fast on court. For being a more flexible feeling shoe underfoot, they definitely felt more stable than they should, and I think that's probably a product of that forefoot shank. It's also a product that is a full-length tread pattern. You're getting a lot of grip on the ground, or you're getting a lot of ground contact on these, a lot of surface area in the ground. So, and honestly, the lateral flange on these, although it doesn't look really big, it is very long and kind of, it's more prominent when you're looking at the shoe from the top down, looking at the actual outsole tread. So yeah, they're not the fastest shoes out there. They don't feel super lively underfoot, at least to me, but they do feel very flexible, very easy to get in and out of kind of weird situations, or to make quick stops and then kind of change direction and just kind of change the direction that you're putting force into the shoe. Because sometimes with the shoe, it can get a little bit stiff in there, and trying to change directions and trying to change like kind of where you're putting, you're kind of changing where your momentum is going. It can be kind of hard. That shoe can either stop really hard and you roll over it, or you can buckle right over it. Whereas in these ones, it really did have kind of that nice tweener mixture. But if you look at the outsole durability test on these things, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, it did not get a millimeter of damage on this. The durometer only came in at 14.5. This is not the hardest rubber out there, but it did resist the burr pretty good. I still think on an outdoor court, just the uppers and the exposed midsole and the fact that these treads are so far apart and they're so thin, it's gonna start to wear down, especially because of how these things grip. And in terms of indoor courts, honestly, I think the durability on these actually pretty outsized for also how much tack you're getting underneath of your foot. But the real conundrum with the KD17s comes down to their fit. These things are long. They come in at 29.3 centimeters for a men's size 11. Now, typically a men's size 11 shoe, it's 28.8 to 28.9 is like that, you know, pretty much that typical range of length, right? Anything over that feels a little long. These things, they felt long, they fit long. The width comes in at a 9, which is, you know, pretty medium. You know, it's on that, you know, we're kind of dead center medium. The thing is because, like I said, this lace line carries all the foxing and reinforcement, the more you crank down on that lace line, the more you're cranking down on these little stiffer elements, you know, the more unforgiving it's gonna get. That's why I wish that there was another lace eyelet here so that you could a little bit more customize your ankle collar without having to crank down on the mid part of your foot. I would say a narrow foot, I think should go true to size. If you're very narrow, you might want to go down a half size if you're a shorter foot, right? And you can handle it, because then you'll get more of a 1-to-1. If you're a medium foot, I think you just go true to size. A 2E, you can try to go up 1/2 size on these, but I think you just try to break them in true because of the length, right? You start going up half size, things are gonna get bigger and bigger, right, in terms of length. A 4E, I do think they're a mismatch because of the stabilizing elements. It's, like I said in the beginning, them on their own, they are great. It's just that because the length and the width of the shoe not being able to go up a lot, it's like, you know, going up 1 size on these is gonna be a lot of shoe. That's where I think the issues come with these. In terms of the snake bitten foot, in terms of heel pain, they feel great. The Air Strobel unit's really nice. The heel counter, like I said, super supportive, right? You know, you're not slipping in and out of the shoe, which is great. Forefoot pain though, especially a shock going up your leg. I was wondering in these when I'm playing, I'm saying, there should be a big zoom air unit in the forefoot, there should be Air Strobel in these, and there should be, you know, a little bit more of a you know, forgiving foam. Why is my left knee hurting? That's usually a barometer. And I think it's because of the Strobel board here, right? The plastic Strobel, that shank right under your foot. So if you can get an orthotic in these, right? Offload that forefoot a little bit or get some padding underneath of there just to, you know, absorb some shock there, then I think these become better for more shock-induced injuries like, you know, knee pain, hip pain, back pain, shin splints, things like that, forefoot, ball of foot pain, stuff like that. It is going to shield some arthritis in the toes, so that's actually a little bit of a nice thing there, although I do think probably still need an orthotic in there just to kind of to shield your foot from that Strobel board. But I think this shoe with an orthotic really is actually something pretty nice for a lot of people as long as you're the right width and length of foot. But without the orthotic, that Strobel board in the forefoot, like I said, can just be a little bit unforgiving if you are someone that maybe suffers from some of those shock-induced injuries. But talking about the playability of the KD17, this was my favorite playing KD shoe since the 14s. I thought that these had, like I said, the best combination of stability side to side and flexibility. They did feel like very flexible shoes underfoot, but that they weren't going to buckle underfoot, right? I felt like I could really plant my lead foot, kind of throw all my body weight, which, you know, when I'm, you know, got a head of steam going, there's a lot of it. So I really did like that, and that's why I think if there's an orthotic in these, I think that these get into that really elite playing level, because I did notice that they had that buttery feeling underfoot, but like I said, just were a little bit unforgiving. So like I said, they're not rocket ships by any means, just because, like I said, all that stuff is contained in the forefoot. It's not crossing zones, so you're not getting the diving board effect, but you are getting a tremendous amount of flexibility, tremendous amount of malleability in the shoe. So I do think there's gonna be a lot of people that really like these, and a lot of people that kind of find some of the playability of the 14s in these. No, they don't have the lockdown of the 14s. No, they don't have that as buttery of a feeling of the 14s, right? Because they don't have Zoom Strobel in them in the forefoot. But that isolated playability of these I thought was really nice, and the fact that they gripped so well, but that they stayed stable for a shoe that also allowed a lot of degrees of freedom. So I think the best part of them is their playability for sure. And so if you can augment them to get the comfort and the fit right, I think they're gonna treat you very well too. So to me, I am really excited about these because there is some pretty cool innovation in them, and there is just some using old design to do new things, which I think is great because Nike has such a great design library that they can do stuff like this and make it work. I love that, and the fact that this tongue is actually super padded and nice and plush. So I think, just like I said, getting the fit right on these would have made, like, really taken these, I think, up, you know, into that super elite territory, some of the best shoes of the year. I think the fit is what kind of hobbles these a little bit. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, especially if you're trying to pick up a pair of these and if you were a huge fan like I was of the 14s and kind of are looking for a shoe that kind of plays a little bit more like those versus the 15s and 16s, at least in my opinion. These are a little bit more, like I said, similar playing style to those. So like I said, if you do want to see another shoe in Nike's lineup that, like I said, was just really close, in my opinion, to having that super elite performance, but just needed a little bit of design tweaks, and what I did to actually, you know, kind of modify and redesign those shoes, the Nike GT Cut 3, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.